Let's get started then. I'm going to have a few introductory remarks, and then after that, we'll move into the PowerPoint presentation. The purpose of this webinar is to provide more information about DEP's proposed Title V and watershed permit regulatory changes. Additional information can be found on DEP's website under the Title V webpage. It is important to make clear that this is not a public hearing, which is an official proceeding under General Laws, Chapter 30A, where the public is given an opportunity to provide public comments that DEP records and considers in finalizing draft regulations. Tonight, we're having only an information session. The public hearings for formal public comment are on November 30th at 6 p.m. That's a hybrid hearing in DEP's Lakeville office. December 1 at 1 p.m. in a fully remote hearing, and December 5th at 6 p.m. for a hybrid hearing in the Barnstable Town Hall. More information about those hearings and directions for submitting written comments can be found on DEP's website. Tonight, we will provide more information on the proposed regulatory changes in two ways. First, we will give a PowerPoint presentation that provides an overview. Second, we will respond to written questions raised by you, the participants, with the question and answer webinar function. After that, people may raise their virtual hands and we will unmute you one at a time to ask questions of us. Tonight's session will also be translated into Spanish and Portuguese and posted on DEP's YouTube page. In addition, there are several informative documents that have been translated and will be posted on DEP's website, if they have not been already. With that, I'm going to now turn to Mary Beth to start the PowerPoint presentation. Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Beth Chubb with the MassDEP. And as Tim mentioned, I'm going to take you through this presentation on the draft proposed revisions to 310 CMR 15 or Title V and proposed new regulations for 314 CMR 21 watershed permitting. In this presentation, we will provide you with information on the environmental situation that required these changes, the community outreach that DEP has been doing over this past summer on these proposed changes, get into the overview of what these proposed changes are for the nitrogen sensitive area provisions of Title V, and also a brief overview of what the watershed permit is. We will provide information on potential funding opportunities, including the State Revolving Fund Program and the Community Septic System Management Loan Program. And as Tim has provided, we will reiterate the public comment time period and the public hearing sessions. DEP is proposing these regulations to address the water quality issues we are seeing in our estuaries and embayments along southeastern, south coastal Massachusetts, Cape Cod, and the islands. Densely populated areas have resulted in higher nitrogen loads than these water bodies can accept. This causes poor water quality and leads to eutrophication. Eutrophication is the accelerated growth of nuisance plants and algae, and this uses up oxygen in the water. This lack of oxygen forces out finfish, shellfish, and other subaquatic plant species. The result of eutrophication is devastating. There's a loss of eelgrass beds that serve as nurseries for many fish. Algae blooms, some of which are toxic, lead to closures, water closures. Unpleasant odors and scums are on the water. Fish kills happen, and there's reductions in important aquatic life, such as lobsters, shrimp, scallops, and shellfish. Because of this nitrogen overload, many of our estuaries and abatements do not meet the Mass Water Quality Standards. This results in impaired listing. They cannot support their designated uses as supporting aquatic life or even for recreational purposes. The impaired listing leads to a development of a total maximum daily load. The total maximum daily load, or TMDL, is approved by EPA and establishes a target amount of a pollutant that a water body can accept and still maintain its designated use. This is not just an environmental problem. It is also an economic problem. Because this problem causes a decline in fishing, it causes closures of shellfish beds, it causes a loss of recreational opportunities. And for these areas, that can mean a loss of tourism. This ultimately leads to a loss of business for these areas and a decrease in real estate values. And unaddressed, this problem will only become worse. This is not a new problem. In 2001, the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, or MEP, began assessing the estuaries and embayments along our coastline. Through 2001 to 2015, 89 watersheds were examined. By 2015, the MEP work had noted that coastal embayments were being impacted by nitrogen, and septic systems were contributing to this nitrogen load. Also in 2015, the Cape Cod 208 plan to address water quality on Cape Cod was approved by EPA and certified by Governor Baker. And separately, but in the same year, DEP under Executive Order 562 was tasked with reviewing all of its regulations and received numerous comments pertaining to Title V. DEP formed a stakeholder group to address these comments, one of which was a comment concerning the nitrogen-sensitive areas provisions of Title V and how these areas could be redefined to address this nitrogen loading problem that was being shown in our embayments. And in 2020, DEP formed the NSA subcommittee to discuss this specific issue. That NSA subcommittee met 3 times from September 2020 to most recently this past June to discuss potential changes to the nitrogen-sensitive area provisions of Title V. They looked at expanding the definition of nitrogen-sensitive areas, defining how these areas would be determined, what new nitrogen requirements would apply to these areas, what compliance options would be available, and how an implementation schedule would look. I'm not trying to make you squint with this slide. If you'd like to see it in greater detail, you can go to mass.gov and type in MEP, and you will go to our webpage for the Massachusetts Estuaries Project. But this map I'm using to show you the cities and towns that will be affected by this regulatory revision: Cape Cod, the islands, and southeastern, south coastal Massachusetts. In June of 2022, prior to putting forth draft regulations, DEP began an outreach campaign for these towns and cities that would be affected by these changes. On June 1st, Commissioner Suberg issued a letter to all of these cities and towns explaining what the proposed framework would be. And then our summer tour commenced. Our DEP staff from our Southeast Regional Office in Lakeville and also from our Boston office met with 32 cities and towns and interested groups, such as the Cape Cod Commission, the Buzzards Bay Action Committee, Realtors Associations, Health Agent Associations, the Cape Managers Associations, EPA, and legislators. And we also began development of our webpage. The Title V regulation webpage on mass.gov has a lot of information already populated, and we will continue to add to it. And as Tim mentioned, the recording of this information session will also be posted there. So let's take a look at the details of these changes. Currently, Title V defines nitrogen-sensitive areas, or NSAs, for drinking water protection purposes. These are Zone 2's interim wellhead protection areas and areas with both on-site septic systems and non-public drinking water supply wells. And for these, we impose a loading restriction of 440 gallons per day per acre. These provisions will be maintained in Title V. There will be no changes. What we are proposing is to establish a new designation of NSA that we're calling a Natural Resource Area NSA. There are two categories, two groups for this new Natural Resource Area NSA. The first is any watershed through an embayment or sub-embayment that is the subject of a nitrogen total maximum daily load approved by the US EPA pursuant to the Federal Clean Water Act and an area-wide water quality management plan pursuant to Section 208 of the Clean Water Act addressing nitrogen pollution. What this is referring to is the Cape Cod communities. All Cape Cod communities are subject to the 208 plan approved by EPA in 2015. There are currently 30 watersheds across Cape Cod that have EPA-approved nitrogen TMDLs. This map, which is also available on our website, shows the Cape area that we're talking about in this darker green shade. The second group of Natural Resource Area NSAs are any watershed to an embayment or sub-embayment that is the subject of an EPA-approved TMDL or is determined to be nitrogen sensitive by MassDEP based on a scientific evaluation adopted through a public process involving public notice that includes a scientific and regulatory rationale for the designation and affording a 60-day public comment period. So going back to this map, part of this second group are in the lighter green shade and the teal color. The lighter green shade being those communities that have, a total nitrogen TMDL, and the teal colored ones have an accepted MEP report, but don't have the TMDL developed yet. And then there are others that aren't shaded yet because they haven't completed or even maybe begun a scientific evaluation. So what does it mean when this area is designated? Well, for septic systems serving both new construction and for existing facilities that are in a natural resource area, NSA, those systems must incorporate best available nitrogen reducing technology within 5 years of the effective date of that NSA designation. Or the community can apply for, obtain, and operate under a watershed permit. The draft regulations define best available nitrogen reducing technology as an alternative system certified by MassDEP for general use pursuant to Title V, which has the lowest effluent total nitrogen performance value. An alternative system that is granted provisional or pilot approval by MassDEP may also be utilized as long as that system has a total nitrogen performance value less than or equal to the lowest system for certified for general use. So what's the timing for implementing this requirement? For the first group, the 30 watersheds on Cape Cod that have a nitrogen TMDL and are operating under the Cape Cod 208 plan, the NSA designation is automatic and effective the date these regulations are promulgated. For the second group, those that may have a TMDL or may have an accepted scientific evaluation, or they may be just starting that evaluation or working to complete an evaluation, those would go through an individual public process and DEP will designate that area at a later date after the regulations are promulgated. The exemption from the requirement for the individual owner to have to install enhanced treatment is if the community obtains a watershed permit that covers an area that would be subject to this new NSA regulation. A community can apply directly for a watershed permit, or if they are not yet ready to do so, but intend to do so, the community can submit a notice of intent within 18 months of being designated as a natural resource area NSA. Submitting the notice of intent will pause or toll that 5-year installation requirement. So this chart is to help depict those two different groups and the pathway and how Title V and the watershed permit work together. On the top tier, we have the 30 watersheds on the Cape that are automatically designated when the regs are promulgated. This starts the 5-year time clock for the individual system owner to upgrade, unless the community either submits a notice of intent within 18 months of the reg promulgation to say that they intend to pursue a watershed permit, or if the community is ready to do so, they can apply directly for the watershed permit. Similarly, but at a later time, the bottom group, the second group of natural resource area NSA, these will be designated by DEP through a public process. Upon that completion of that public process, the 5-year time clock would start for that watershed and those individual systems in that watershed, unless again, the community chose to apply for a notice of intent, submit a notice of intent, saying they will pursue the watershed permit or to directly apply for the watershed permit. So in addition to these draft revisions to Title V, DEP is proposing regulations for watershed permits. Briefly, a watershed permit is a 20-year voluntary permit instead of our traditional 5-year permit. It's issued to a local government unit, a regional local government unit. It can be issued to multiple local government units that have intermunicipal agreements. It provides communities the opportunity to employ a greater range of solutions to address water quality needs and utilize alternative and innovative approaches. It utilizes an adaptive management strategy that allows communities to test out a technology, monitor and evaluate it, and review the results, and then adapt as needed in order to address the water quality impairments. The watershed permit is based on a town-approved watershed management plan. The watershed management plan is the long-term plan to address an existing water quality impairment to restore and protect that water quality. It can be based on a comprehensive or a targeted watershed management plan. For watersheds with the TMDL, this plan must be designed to achieve compliance with the water quality standards for the TMDL and demonstrate at least 75% pollutant reduction within that 20-year time frame. There is an allowance in the regulation that DEP may determine an alternative schedule is appropriate based on issues specific to the watershed. The watershed permit will follow a public notice, public comment issuance process similar to most DEP permits. It will be published in the MIPA Environmental Monitor. It will be circulated at a newspaper in the area affected by the watershed permit, and also posted on DEP's webpage. Then it will afford a comment period of at least 60 days, and a public hearing can be held if requested by the permittee or deemed necessary by DEP. The modification, suspension, revocation, and termination of a watershed permit will also follow a public notice process. There would be some minor modifications that would be allowed to go through without a public comment process. But for revocation and termination, if a permit was revoked by DEP or the permittee terminated their coverage under a watershed permit, this would follow the same public notice and comment process as the issuance process. And that's because upon termination or revocation, the requirement for the individual system owner to install best available nitrogen reducing technology, then again applies. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Jones, who's going to compare the two different tracks of the Title V IA installation and the watershed permit.
Great, thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, now we have a general understanding of the two different approaches being put forward by DEP. A good way to better understand them a little bit more deeply is to compare and contrast them. So we'll do that using this table here. In the first row, we see with the Title V upgrade requirement that it's mandatory and must be done within 5 years of designation unless, and now we move to the right-hand column, a community obtains a watershed permit or files a notice of intent within 18 months of the nitrogen sensitive area designation to obtain that permit. And the permit is it involves implementation of a comprehensive plan focused on reducing nitrogen to meet specific water quality targets and goals for that watershed. The implementation period is 5 years for the mandatory upgrade and 20 years for the watershed permit. For the mandatory upgrade, it would be the individual septic system owner who would pay, and for the watershed permit, it would be the community that would have to pay. Type of participation is mandatory unless, as I mentioned previously, the community obtains a watershed permit. And the watershed permit is a voluntary choice by the community to enter into that permit. But once entered, the terms and conditions must be complied with. Funding sources. There is a funding source for septic system upgrades. It's called the Community Septic Management Loan Program. And more information about that can be found on the DEP website under the Title V section. There are more funding sources for the watershed permitting approach, and those information about those funding sources can also be found on the DEP website. Effectiveness at reducing nitrogen to achieve target levels. The mandatory upgrade requirement might not be sufficient to meet water quality goals, and that might leave the watershed nitrogen impacts insufficiently addressed, which could require further action in the future by that community in that watershed to bring those nitrogen loads down to where they need to be. In contrast, the watershed permitting regulations would allow the use of various ways to reduce nitrogen in the watershed. It involves a quantitative approach to efficiently estimate the nitrogen that needs to be reduced to meet water quality goals. Moving to the next slide. The first row, we see the categories feasibility. And in the first column, with the nitrogen sensitive area Title V upgrade requirement, there are concerns with feasibility of that approach. Concerns with cost, shortage of supplies, shortage of contractors, and the 5-year implementation period. In contrast, the watershed permitting regulations would allow for more time, would allow for a wider distribution of costs, the use of adaptive management to increase feasibility and flexibility, and it allows the use of non-conventional methods to reduce nitrogen within the watershed. Moving down, in terms of flexibility, the upgrade requirement is not flexible. It requires the use of IA technology, and it has a short time frame. In contrast, the watershed permitting approach is flexible, and a community can tailor its approach to its needs and its interests, and it allows for multiple solutions to be implemented to reduce nitrogen in the watershed. Potential benefits. With the nitrogen sensitive area mandatory upgrade under Title V, we would see localized improvements and potential estuary and abatement area improvements. The watershed permitting approach can be tailored to the entire community, allowing for greater potential for overall nitrogen load reduction, leading to broader watershed improvement. And that approach can address more than nitrogen. For example, the watershed permitting approach can be used to reduce phosphorus, which is known to cause eutrophication in freshwater bodies, such as freshwater ponds, and excessive algal growth in those areas. Last, who bears the burden? For the mandatory Title V upgrade, the burden is borne by the individual septic system owners, and the municipality must approve all upgrades and provide for enforcement with DEP assistance if needed. In contrast, the watershed permitting regulations spread the burden throughout the community as that community decides to do on its own. It may lead to community-wide tax or rate increases. Okay, with that, that's the last page of the table. And now I'm going to turn the PowerPoint presentation over to Maria Pinot, who's going to provide some information on funding sources. Maria?
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Pinot. I'm the Director of the Division of Municipal Services at MassDEP, and I oversee the State Revolving Fund program. Today, I will provide a very brief overview of financing options through the State Revolving Fund program, and I will start with the Community Management Loan Program. This model has been very successful in meeting the needs of communities and could be used to finance the new Title V systems if the proposed regulatory revisions are promulgated. The SRF program has been financing replacements or repairs of failed septic systems at participating communities across the Commonwealth for many decades. The SRF program dedicates on an annual basis $5 million to offer 2% interest loans to communities to fund their septic loan programs. Over the past 5 years, the SRF program has issued 29 loans, totaling over $14 million at an average loan amount to a community of $450,000. This is how the Barnstable County operates their loan program, which now operates as its own revolving fund, offering loans to communities across Cape Cod. Next slide, please. So how does this program work? MassDEP accepts loans applications on a rolling basis throughout the years, and communities can apply for financing whenever there is demand from homeowners. Homeowners, in turn, apply to the town for financing, and the town draws the funds down as needed from the SRF loan. The loan to the community is secured with a general obligation pledge of the communities and receives the traditional debt authorization at the local level. The homeowner loans, in turn, is secured through a betterment agreement between the town and the community. And MassDEP, or the Clean Water Trust, who is our partner in implementing the SRF program, are not a party to this agreement. Next slide, please. Since these betterment agreements are governed by Massachusetts general law, who oversees the interest rates and how they can be charged, but the interest rates that are charged to the community by the community to the homeowner can be used to cover the cost to administer the expenses, and any funds that are left from that can be revolved into the fund to provide additional loans to homeowners. The draws made against the loan by the community operate under the Trust Interim Loan Program and accrue no interest and no fees. In most instances, the loan to the community is put into repayment loan within 2 years or sooner if all the funds have been drawn and if the community decides that they are finished with the program. Next slide, please. So in addition to the community septic loan program, The State Revolving Fund Program offers low-interest loans to cities and towns to finance water infrastructure projects that are necessary to comply with the Clean Water and the Safe Drinking Water Acts. As you probably might have heard, Massachusetts expects to receive additional funding from the federal government in the amount of $1.1 billion of infrastructure funds over a period of 5 years through 2026. To access this funding, participation in the State Revolving Fund Program is necessary. These funds provide for added loan capacity, but more importantly, they also provide for added principal forgiveness for disadvantaged communities. The slide that you're looking at is an image of the application process for SRF. And I should note that the SRF program finances all planning projects. And this process is for the construction projects, which can be very costly. And because demand is a lot more significant than the capacity of the program, even with the infrastructure funding, only high priority projects are offered financing. The SRF program deadlines are established according to EPA grant commitments and are fairly fixed. However, MassDEP will make every effort to work with borrowers to meet their project's needs. The application process begins with the annual project solicitations that begins at the start of the summer in early July and runs through mid-August of each year. When the solicitation period closes, MassDEP evaluates all construction proposals and ranks them based on pre-established criteria to list projects by priority ranking. Projects with a significant environmental benefit score high on the priority listing. And as I mentioned, because the demand for funds exceeds program capacity, only the priority projects that are listed on the intended use plan are offered financing. The final intended use plan is published at the beginning of the IUP year. And once a project appears in the intended use plans, the borrowers may submit a loan application together with plans and specifications. Loan commitments are generally issued by the end of the IUP year. I would like to mention a key deadline in this process, which is the June 30th deadline for local appropriation at town meeting, because without this authorization, an SRF loan is not possible. And once loan agreements are executed, bidding and construction may begin. The application process takes between 18 months to 2 years from project proposal submittal to securing financing and to start construction. As this indicates that readiness to proceed is central in participating in the SRF, and proactive planning is a must. With this, I conclude my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Maria. So as you're all aware, we are having public info sessions, having one right now as listed, and we will be having another tomorrow at noontime, which will be the same presentation in this same Zoom webinar format. As Tim mentioned at the outset of this info session, there are public hearings scheduled, and the public comment period is open for these draft regulations and draft revisions. That schedule is posted. We have 3 different public hearing sessions, one on November 30th at 6 p.m. in our DEP Southeast Regional Lakeville office. That is a hybrid meeting, can be in person and online. December 1st, which is a 1 p.m. Zoom meeting, not a hybrid, all online. And then December 5th at 6 p.m. at the Barnstable Town Hall, and that will also be a hybrid meeting. and for in-person and online attendance. Information for these public hearing sessions, links to the actual draft regulation language, and other information that we're posting, including the recording of this information session, can all be found by going to mass.gov. The public hearings for that schedule and to register for those sessions, if you are planning to participate online, you can go to the public hearings page on mass.gov. And for other information, you can go to the Title V regulatory page. So you can put in Title V or 310 CMR 15.000, and that will get you to a list of the financial resources that Maria was speaking to and more, and details and the regulatory revisions themselves. If you have questions, you're welcome to contact the staff in the Southeast Regional Office that are listed here. For questions specific to your town situation, it is good to contact our folks in Lakeville. If you have questions pertaining to public hearing sessions or the draft regulations or how to submit public comment on these revisions, you can contact me, marybeth.chubb at mass.gov, or any of the folks listed in the Boston office. And as Maria Pinode mentioned, please contact her for any questions concerning the SRF funding resources that she reviewed. And that concludes our formal presentation.
Great, thanks, Mary Beth. And as I said previously, and as I think Mary Beth may have said too, if you're interested in looking at this PowerPoint presentation later, it is being recorded and it will be posted on DEP's YouTube channel. So now that we've gone through the presentation, I want to switch gears a little bit, and we'll now turn the session over to you, the attendees, the people who want more information about these programs. And as I said previously, the way we'll do that first is to provide you to ask questions, the opportunity for you to ask questions through the question and answer function on your screens in the form of written questions, and I will read those, and then either I or most likely not I, but one of our expert DEP staff people will answer the question in response. And then after that, once we've answered all the questions, we'll then move into another phase where we'll allow you the opportunity to raise your virtual hand, and we'll go in the order that your hands are raised. We'll unmute you, and you can ask your question, and we will answer it to the best we can. Okay, let's turn now to the first question, and I'll read it, and we'll respond to that. The first question is from Jeffrey Rosen, and the question is, where can the scientific data be found and examined? That's a difficult question to answer without knowing more about what data you're referring to, but I assume you're referring to data supporting TMDLs or MEP reports, or analysis that are that's finding nitrogen impairment or impacts. And for that answer, I'll turn it over first to Mary Beth and Andrew Osei, and then Leldon.
So the MEP reports are available online. Correct me if I misspeak, Drew, but I would defer to Drew for more details on where you can find each, for your town. You should contact your town officials directly for information that they may have, but the MEP reports that have been done are available, and I believe on the MEP webpage that I spoke to earlier. That be correct, Drew?
Yes, that is correct. The MEP reports that have been completed are all online. And then also the TMDLs that have been finalized, those are online as well. And so a simple way to try to find if your area has a MEP or a TMDL is just Googling your town name, and then with TMDL or MEP, And Google's pretty good at bringing up the Watershed name, even if you don't have the Watershed name handy.
Great. Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Mary Beth. Weldon, anything else to add?
Just one addition about the scientific evaluation data. Right now we don't have scientific evaluation being submitted for the purposes of these regs, but there are organizations that are collecting data which could be submitted for that purpose in the future. Those organizations would have that data, and if they are collecting those data under a quality assurance plan that is approved by our watershed planning program, which is a section of DEP located in our Worcester office, then those the data that have been submitted under that QAP would be available as well to the public. So the simple answer is either through the organization that's doing the data collection or through MassDEP if it's being collected under a quality assurance plan that DEP has approved.
Okay, great. Thanks, Weldon. Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Mary Beth. All right, let's go to the next question. This question's from Gary Markowitz. And his question is, he says, 2 questions. In the town of Barnstable, there's an existing CWMP. Will Barnstable be required to resubmit their CWMP to attain the watershed permit? I can answer that question. And the answer is no. And I'll allow Drew to follow up with any missing information any information that I missed. The answer is no. You will not have to resubmit it. What you'll have to do is submit supplemental information that is necessary to bring it up to the level of a watershed management plan. So you may have in your CWMP almost all of the pieces of information you need for a watershed management plan. And we would only ask that you supplement the necessary information to bring it up to the specific items that are included in the draft watershed permitting regulations and specified there. Drew, anything to add on that?
No, nothing to add. That answers the question as I would have as well.
Okay. Mary Beth or Weldon, anything? Okay, great. All right, moving down, Gary Markowitz has another question, and this one's a little bit more specific. In Cotuit, there's no plan to install sewering infrastructure within the Barnstable CWMP for more than 25 years. With the near benthic water conditions within Pompanesett Bay, Shoestring Bays, how will DEP require Barnstable to allow best denitrifying technology within the next 5 to 10 years? Also, what are the fines that MaDEP will levy for non-compliance? Let's see, Drew, you probably have a good handle on the first part of that question, I'm guessing, correct?
Yeah. And so I believe that is correct. I can't verify that right now in terms of the order of planning for Barnstable in terms of their interventions for nitrogen removal per watershed. They were planning to address that area later. And so through our watershed permitting framework, we would still require a watershed permit for an exemption of the Title V requirements for that area. And so within that, there still can be a plan to meet the targets for that watershed. And so a lot of the kind of the fine tuning that a lot of the towns have to do now is match their timelines with the new framework that we have. And then also a lot of the towns were aiming at 100% of removal on different timelines. So they have to take that into consideration as well, as within our framework, we're looking at 75% minimum in the 20-year time frame.
Thanks, Drew. Mary Beth, anything to add? No.
No, I don't have anything to add on the specifics, just in response to the second half of that question in terms of enforcement. So Title V, for the most part, the local approving authority is the enforcing agent of Title V. But DEP can, if needed, also assist with any enforcement. It cannot speak to any predetermined fines. Not from DEP's perspective at this point, though.
Thanks,
And
Mary Beth.
Tim, I would just add,
Bowman?
and this is a little beyond the scope of the question, but assuming, you'd want to know about enforcement related to the watershed permit as well. There are enforcement provisions that are included in the watershed permit regs. That section is at 314 CMR 21.09. And those regs are posted to our website. So if you wanted to understand how that enforcement mechanism worked, you could consult that section of the watershed permit regs as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, let's move to the next question. Another question from Jeffrey Rosen. He says, it seems that the Title V requirements will lead to an enormous amount of monitoring. Who will do the sampling? How will the data be managed? Who will examine the data? And how will this rule be enforced? A rule that cannot be monitored properly or the data analyzed effectively will accomplish little. I'm gonna assume that you're talking about the Mr. Rosen. I'm gonna assume you're talking about the watershed permit requirement and the monitoring that will have to take place for the permit. And for that answer, I'll turn to Drew. I think he'll answer that one, please.
Yeah, and so for the watershed permitting framework, there's still an expectation that first defining our target points for compliance or meeting the water quality standards through the TMDL are called sentinel stations, and those are located within the embayment itself. And so we would expect that there's monitoring at the sentinel stations to be conducted by the town, and we work with the towns on that on a CWP level, comprehensive wastewater management plan, as we have meetings with the towns regularly on that already. But that's assuming if the question is pertaining to that. But it could also be geared towards the IA systems or the septic systems that are put in. And Mary Beth could better speak to how we manage that data. But in terms of actual monitoring towards habitat restoration and the abatements, we're already communicating with the towns on the regular monitoring for that be needed in the future.
Thanks,
Mary
Drew.
Beth?
Yeah, in terms of monitoring, if the question is referring to the individual system owner upgrading their system, each innovative alternative system for the best available nitrogen reducing technology would have an approval with monitoring requirements, and they would require an operator to oversee. So the homeowner would be having a contract with an operator, and there is oversight required. As the technology moves through the performance evaluation and then achieves general use, the monitoring on that system is lessened, but it is both reported to the Board of Health and to DEP at the various frequencies that are required during its operation.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Thanks, Drew. I would add to that, and maybe Drew mentioned this, and I apologize if you did, Drew. Under the watershed permitting program, and if a watershed permit is obtained, there's a requirement to file annual reports in that permit, and that's one way that DEP would keep track of the data that's being generated, how the project is moving along, whether it's moving along effectively and well, what it's accomplishing, what it's not accomplishing. And then another benefit of the watershed management plan and the watershed permit is that if it's not working well, if it's not accomplishing much, the watershed permit would allow for adaptive management, meaning that changes can be made within the permit and also in the watershed itself to reduce nitrogen as effectively as possible. So there would be a focus on trying to figure out what's not working and what might work better, and then give those options and opportunity for implementation. Okay, let's
And just
move.
quickly to add to
Yeah,
that
sure.
point, Tim,
Sure.
the use of IA technologies can also be part of a watershed permit. It can be part of the overall plan. And in that respect, the monitoring for those systems is incorporated in the watershed permit. And some municipalities may opt to establish a responsible management entity that would then oversee the monitoring and operation of those systems. But that would be a town by town decision on whether or not they wanted to have such a structure.
Great, thanks, Mary Beth. Okay, let's move down to the next question. This is from an anonymous attendee. And the question is best available nitrogen reducing technology for alternative systems certified by MassDEP? Do they have a TN, total nitrogen limit, of less than 19 milligrams per liter, TN for 660 GPD per acre, and less than 25 milligrams per liter, TN for 550 GDP per acre? Or are there some that are certified for less than 10 or 11? And I know the person to turn to for that answer, Mary Beth.
So yes, currently there are general use certified systems for nitrogen removal that achieve 19 or 25 as the person posed in their question. And those levels were established based on the drinking water protection requirements for nitrogen sensitive areas. There are currently 2 technologies under provisional use approval, which means they are in their performance evaluation testing phase, that are looking to demonstrate that they can meet less than 11 or 10 milligrams per liter. And there is one also that is in piloting that is also looking to demonstrate less than 10 levels also.
Great, thanks, Mary Beth. Anything to add, Drew or Leldon? Okay, great. Thank you, Mary Beth. All right, moving down to the next question. This question is from Courtney Morehouse. And the question is, I work in inland communities. I just want to be sure I understand. It sounds like we already have some NSA designated areas that adhere to enhanced nitrogen treatment under existing Title V. This won't change with the amendment. Is that correct? Mary Beth?
So currently we have nitrogen sensitive areas that are designated to protect drinking water, and that is not going to change. This is a new category. So these watersheds would be newly designated when these regulations are promulgated, particularly automatically for the 30 watersheds on Cape Cod. But existing NSA designations would not change.
All right, anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay. Moving down to the next question. This one is from Kate Rusa. And her question is, how will progress towards watershed permits be monitored? Example, similar reporting to a NPDES permit? I'll let Drew or Mary Beth respond to that one.
Yeah, I'll take the lead on this one. So it was mentioned earlier. So watershed permits will have annual reports where there'll be ongoing reporting of the progress of the implementation strategies that are used for nitrogen reduction. And so there's an ongoing assessment of those technologies. And then a 5th-year report, which is a lot more involved to really consider if there's any adaptive management that will need to be applied, and also keeping an eye on the target, the sentinel stations, to make sure that the concentrations that have been sampled actually in the embayments, that they're verified, that they're being taken. And then we allow, time is needed because there's time of travel in order to actually see impacts in the bay. And so we take those 50-year reports and all the monitoring, and over time assess how progress is being made, and work with the communities to assure that they're moving in the right direction and adaptive management is being applied appropriately.
Great, thanks, Drew. Anything to add, Mary Beth? No, okay. Great. Weldon, anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay. All right, moving down. This question is from an anonymous attendee. Under the watershed permitting option, do you expect the financing ability for large town-wide programs to be considered for waivers to the 20-year requirement during the watershed permitting process? I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you understand it, Drew, or Mary Beth or Leldon?
I'm not sure I understand it. I will.
think
I'll
so.
take a. Do you want to take a shot at that then, MB?
To me, it seems, and maybe this person, if I'm not categorizing it correctly, can pop another a clarification in. I think what it's getting at is that should the town not be able to financially do what's needed under the watershed permit, where are we going to be lenient in that on the 20-year requirement during that watershed permitting process? That's how I'm reading it. It's a comment that we heard quite a bit from towns, concerns about not only lack of funding, but also lack of supplies, lack of ability to complete the projects. So I don't think at this point DEP has a formal waiver process that we've incorporated, but we do have the ability to extend that 75% requirement and the time frame for it under the current regulation.
Yeah, I was going to add, Mary Beth, there's a provision in the draft regulations. It's under section 21.041, and I think this is what you were alluding to, Mary Beth. There is a provision that provides flexibility in the permitting approach that we can take, and it allows applicants and DEP to take into account costs associated with projects that might be undertaken under that permit. So I hope that that answers the question in terms of financing and potential difficulties in financing and whether DEP can take that into consideration. There is a provision in the draft regulations to do that. But whoever the person is who posed the question, if you want to clarify that, we'd be happy to clarify our responses as well. So you can submit another question, happy to clarify for you. The next question is from Richard Judd. Thank you for the presentation. Relative to residential properties, will there be a formula for bedrooms to lot size to qualify that a property must implement IA technology, or is this proposal stating that all Title V systems must upgrade to IA?
I'll take that one.
Mary Beth?
Yeah, the answer is that any septic system that is in a designated natural resource area, NSA, will be required to upgrade with best available nitrogen reducing technology. There is no lot size calculation or exemption. And the alternative is the watershed permit route.
Thanks, Mary Beth. All right, moving down. Let's see. Kate Rusa has a question. And the question is the enhanced nutrient removal alternative septic system listed in the watershed regulation the same as the best available nitrogen reducing technology as defined in the proposed Title V regulations? I'm reading the question again. You want me to read it again? Is the
I
enhanced,
think we would need context.
yeah,
If Kate, do you have a citation you can reference? I don't want to answer it without having the exact reference to what it's referring to in that piece.
yeah, if you could follow up with a citation, that would be helpful. Where it's located within the regulations, that would be very helpful. Okay, we'll look for that to come in. In the meantime, I'll go to the next question from Kevin Resendez. And his question is, do we have enough wastewater operators to handle the IA systems being installed? Drew, you want to take a stab at that one?
That's a tough question for me to answer. I'm not sure if Mary Beth has a better response. Yeah, I would pass to Mary Beth on this one.
Okay, Mary Beth.
It's a real concern. And it's one we've heard of. In addition to supply shortages, operators are limited, and that is a fact. So it is something we're going to have to investigate further and hopefully address.
Yeah, and Tim, I would just add, so
Mhm.
Oversight over the operator and certification program is, run by one of our staff and under my supervision. And so it is an area where we are constantly trying to recruit wastewater people who want to be trained in wastewater operation. There is a shortage. It's something we're aware of. Similarly, there's been shortages of drinking water program operators. We've, do outreach and other ways that we do attempt to recruit. We are constantly training and certifying people to be operators, and hopefully the need to have more operators would spur more interest in some of those programs.
Okay, thanks, Logan. All right, let's move down to the next question. This question is from Tanya Ryden. And the question is, please elaborate on best available nitrogen reducing technology and how DEP identifies the specific technology with the lowest N performance level. Mary Beth?
So we have to figure out the finer details of that. As I mentioned, currently, because of the current requirements of Title V, technologies under general use have a performance value of 19 as their lowest achievable. So under general use, that's our best available performing technology. Under provisional, however, we do have two technologies that are demonstrating less than 10. And I think what we're going to have to do is have a range of values for what technologies can achieve. For example, the 19 to 25 serving drinking water protection purposes, and then you could have 15 to 19, and as the technologies develop and come in with their performance evaluations. That's a very good question.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Okay, the next question is from John Farnsworth. And he wrote, Central Massachusetts, ? How do our NSAs interact with the proposed reg changes? In my community, we have 32 miles of sensitive riverbank, Nashua River in parentheses, 10 plus ponds, ACECs, and numerous wetland resource areas. And we're very concerned about nitrogen impacts. John Farnsworth, that's from John Farnsworth, Lancaster Board of Health.
Kim, I can try this one.
Okay.
Others can help if they need to. So
Logan?
generally, phosphorus is a controlling nutrient in freshwater systems, which would be, those that are probably of most concern to Mr. Farnsworth. Nitrogen tends to be the controlling nutrient in estuarine systems and marine ecosystems. So in general, nitrogen would be of concern in areas that are, zone 2's interim wellhead protection areas, or lots where there is a service by both on-site septic disposal and and on-site drinking water wells for nitrogen. So I'm not aware of nitrogen TMDLs or nitrogen MEP reports in Central Mass. These designations that I'm aware of all occur in coastal and estuarine areas. But there may be phosphorus TMDLs there are phosphorus TMDLs in many locations in Central Mass that may be signifying that there are impacts from phosphorus on these freshwater systems that are being mentioned here in this question. This current proposal, doesn't really reach at those. It really is addressing those that are nitrogen TMDLs, nitrogen impaired MEP reports, or scientific evaluations in these coastal areas. Anything, Drew or Mary Beth, to add?
Okay. All right, thank you, Leldon. All right, moving down. The next question is from an anonymous attendee. And the question's this: best available nitrogen technology. Why this approach versus a standard that can be met by various technologies? Seems like it would create a monopoly for which homeowners cannot find competing bids. Also, what if that best technology can't keep up with the demand or has difficulties sourcing materials to build these systems? The proposed ideas are on point. Perhaps the implementation can be reimagined. Mary Beth, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, it's a very good comment. We may want to consider submitting that formally for us to consider. As I just spoke to, I think the finer details are going to have to be worked out once the regs are promulgated. One thing about how we're categorizing them, and I mentioned potentially a range, is that the goal is to improve water quality. And if a town is looking at utilizing the IA technologies, they're going to be looking for a certain level of removal. So it may not be 10 that's enough. They may need 8, they may need 7. But a range may accommodate those values. So I'm taking this more of a comment that we should consider as we develop this program further. And I would encourage this attendee to please submit that comment formally.
Okay. Anything to add, Drew or Leldon?
The only thing that I'll add is that we're hoping that this will encourage more technologies to apply for pilot and move through the provisional process and towards general. Because before, the focus was drinking water, and that's why the majority of our systems focus on the 19. But now we have this as an impetus as well for more technologies. So we're hoping for that.
Yeah, and to Drew's point, this might sort of accelerate the provisional and piloting approval processes, or just the number of facilities or installations that are occurring to be able to collect data more quickly. So it may have the effect of accelerating that process a little bit.
Okay. I would add too that this, as Mary Beth and Drew mentioned and Leldon mentioned, this raises a good question. And in my mind, it provides a good reason why your community should look seriously at getting a watershed permit, because that provides for multiple alternative ways to address nitrogen problems within the watershed in the community. And it's not focused just on the best available nitrogen reducing technology. Although, as Mary Beth pointed out previously, that may be a part of a watershed permit. It depends upon the community and the needs within that community. Okay, let's move down to the next question. Another anonymous attendee question. MassDEP is a notoriously underfunded agency. The Watershed Permit Program will be a new program at DEP. What budget increase did DEP receive in order to fully implement the new Watershed Permit Program? What resources has DEP committed to complete TMDLs for all nitrogen impaired estuaries? Leldon, do you want to take a first crack at this?
Yeah, Tim, I think I can help here. Thank you for your concern about our funding. We appreciate that. It is a new program. The managers at DEP, working with staff, we've identified the need for additional staffing to be able to handle these resources. It's something that we're, aware of. We've made requests for increases in personnel specifically for this purpose, and we are working on those. When the program was being developed, we were making the resource constraints and resource needs to really conduct the program and do it well. We were making people aware of that as we got through that approval process in state government. And then to the next part of the question, what resources has DEP committed to complete TMDLs for all nitrogen impaired estuaries? So the watershed planning program is also under my supervision. I'm working carefully and closely with our staff who in the watershed planning program, we're trying to prioritize the TMDLs for this effort. So those that, might have been further on the list, further down on the list, but are important for the success of this project, they may get reprioritized. So we're kind of addressing that as we recognize the need. There's additional pressure that's being created for the watershed planning program through, if we were to pursue a nitrogen sensitive area designation based solely on the MEP report or on scientific evaluation, we'd also need to involve our watershed planning program, their data and water quality experts. So we would also need their input. We're aware of the resource constraints. We're aware of the additional resource demands. But it's really that this project, this water quality problem warrants that type of investment by DEP. And so we're going to pursue as we can, the resources necessary to really properly implement it. And I'm hopeful that we'll see additional funding sources as the project gets underway.
Okay, thank you, Leldon. Okay, the next question is from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, can communities working on a CWMP or on a watershed permit use the UMass Dartmouth model developed for the MEP reports to calculate nitrogen loads under different scenarios? How would a community get access to the model to evaluate different approaches? Drew?
Yes, and so the UMass Dartmouth, the SMAST models that were used to establish the conditions of embayments, and that was the foundation for the TMDLs that have been finalized. So yes, you can use those models to run different scenarios in how the strategies can be put together to achieve the nitrogen thresholds or the reductions that we are looking for. The best way to access those models would be reaching out to SMAST and those that have collaborated on those original models.
Okay, thanks, Drew.
Also, Leldon can speak to this as well. It's also good to coordinate with our watershed planning program on just the needs for the scientific evaluations or scenario runs as the communities need coming along.
Right, we'd be, trying to develop guidance about scoping any kind of scientific evaluation that might be conducted and be working with watershed planning program, on that scope, and then on the collection of data, adherence to QUAPs, and then the data submittal and evaluation. We would be working closely with watershed planning on that as well.
Okay, Thanks, guys. All right, moving down to the next question. This question's from Cliff Carroll. And the question is, what is the average cost of an IA system? What about recent Title V systems that have been built in the last 5 to 10 years? Your zone mapping has about 30 to 40 golf courses located within your zones. They generate more phosphorus and nitrogen than any homes. What are you doing about that? The town of Barnstable has a sewer plan over the next 10 years. What about homes in that route?
Bunch of questions
Yeah,
there.
there's a
Yeah.
lot
So
there.
I can
Should we
start
break-
us off with some
Okay.
responses. The average cost of an IA system is in a range of $20,000 to $35,000, depending on what is needed for the current system and the site itself. In the draft regulations, if the system is located in a designated natural resource area, NSA, whether it is existing or new, it would be required to add this technology. In the latter part of the question, speaking to the golf courses and their generation of nutrients and nutrient loading, I think the watershed permit is what DEP is doing about that. There are things that can be done to an individual septic system, but there's more that can be done community-wide to address things like the golf course, to address, cluster developments and putting sewer. And if the town of Barnstable has a sewer plan that's over the next 10 years, and they come in and obtain the watershed permit, and that sewer plan is part of that permit, then the homes along that route that are going to be connecting to that sewer, they're covered under that watershed permit. And so that requirement to install that IA system no longer applies to those homes, provided they're under the watershed permit for the town of Barnstable.
Great, thanks, Mary Beth. Anything to add, Weldon or Drew?
Yeah, no, I'll add, in terms of the golf courses, many of the golf courses on the Cape have already instilled best management practices for fertilizer reduction, different ways of applying, and many of the Board of Healths as well have bylaws to encourage that. And so within the watershed permitting framework, you can get credits for that towards your goals. And then another strategy that some golf courses or communities are encouraged golf courses to do is fertigation wells. And so this also, leads to more nitrogen reduction. And so the impacts from golf courses are lessened. So we are cognizant of, golf courses and their role and kind of the low hanging fruit of reductions there.
Thanks, Drew. Weldon, anything to add?
No, I think they stuck the landing on that one. So
All right, thanks, guys. Let's see, the next question is from David Gray. And his question is, if a community has performed CWMP programs and has begun to sewer nitrogen sensitive areas, or has completed sewering projects in these areas, or have begun planning for sewering these areas, would the town's efforts help with private parties' timeframes to upgrade?
I think that all of those types of planning processes and partially, completed and future processes that are described in this question would likely be rolled into a watershed permit application, and that those would help with private parties' timeframes, because if they completed that watershed permit application and got the watershed permit, then it would give relief to those private parties on the requirement to upgrade their Title V system within the 5-year time frame.
Yeah, Drew, anything to add, or Mary Beth, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I'll just add, I mean, if the community is already active towards nitrogen reduction, we don't want to get in the way of that or slow that down. The watershed permit is just to formalize it, better the relationship between MassDEP and the towns, as well as just formalize the monitoring process towards actual habitat restoration. And so it sounds that town that's referenced is already active towards their nitrogen goals. All of that could be ironed out in the watershed permit, and then they get the exemption from the Title V requirements. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Mary Beth, anything to add? Yeah, thank you. All right, moving down, Gary Markowitz has a question. His question is, the town of Barnstable says that denitrifying technology needs to meet a level of 3 milligrams per liter nitrogen to meet their water quality goals and to achieve the 75% requirement with reference to the TMDL. DEP seems to be leaning towards 10 milligrams per liter nitrogen, allowing property owners to install best available IA systems. Which standard will stand? Mary Beth
I would,
or Drew?
Drew, if I just may clarify one part of that, I just would like to clarify that DEP is not leaning towards a standard. What I've been speaking to, and perhaps not very clearly, is that currently we have technologies that are looking to demonstrate that they can meet 10 or less. But we're not leaning towards any standard. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Go ahead, Drew.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Yeah, so it's a bit of an apples and oranges question. The 3 milligrams per liter, I would guess, is really referencing to wastewater treatment operations, because we often have that 3 as a best efforts to really see positive impacts and reduce towards feasible nitrogen levels through that type of operation, a full-scale wastewater treatment plant. And so you should be very careful in comparing the activity of IA systems to wastewater treatment facilities. Both are tools that can be used, but it's used specific to the site-specific needs of that sub-embayment and overall of how we can get the reductions in the actual bay and see progress. And so I would just be careful in comparing concentrations because there's more to the number than the concentrations when comparing septic systems, IA systems, and a full-scale wastewater treatment facility.
Great, thanks, Drew. Weldon, anything to add?
No, I mean, no, I don't think so. I think, Title V is one of the tools that MassDEP has, and that's why we're proposing the Title V revision is to compel some reduction in that direction. But the municipalities that we've all met with also understand they have other water quality goals, and there's been some interest expressed in the watershed permits. So, we're trying to expand the available tools through this kind of dual approach.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, who was on the NSA subcommittee? Who selected them? And did any of them source from Buzzards Bay communities? Weldon or Mary Beth?
Yeah, so the NSA subcommittee, as I mentioned during the presentation, so in 2017, we formed a stakeholder group, and that consisted of a variety of environmental consultants, groups such as the Buzzards Bay Coalition, the Cape Cod Commission, engineers, operators of IA systems, the Realtors Association, Commerce Associations, Board of Health Associations, and those were all on the stakeholder group formed in 2017. And from that group, to specifically speak to this nitrogen sensitive area comment that we received, we asked for people on that group to volunteer to be part of the NSA subcommittee. And yes, the Buzzards Bay Coalition was represented on that subcommittee.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. Let's see, next question is from Gary Markowitz. And the question is, the proposed regulation sticks with sizing systems at the number of bedrooms and 440 gallons per day. We know that many homes are rented with far more occupants than permitted. Is there a chance you'll at least consider setting the sizing of systems on the basis of number of bathrooms? Mary Beth?
So no, sizing of systems is not based on number of bathrooms. It's based on occupancy, and DEP has established a rate of 110 gallons per day per bedroom, which is based on 55 gallons per day per person, which is the average amount of wastewater generated with a safety factor incorporated. So we've analyzed that flow and don't have any intention of changing that 110 per gallon per day per bedroom flow rate in Title V.
Thank you, Mary Beth. All right, moving down, the next question is from Cliff Carroll. In looking at your approved IA vendor list, 90% of them are located in the mid to Western United States. How do you expect to implement these regulations when the huge amount of contractors, monitoring companies, and suppliers do not exist here in our region? Mary Beth?
For a lot of the IA companies, they do have local distribution management companies that oversee and work with them to supply their systems and oversee their systems. Under their approvals, and IA technology is required to train installers and operators should their technology deviate, greatly from a conventional Title V system. But yes, as mentioned before, the supply is a concern, a legitimate concern for these technologies, and in general for even the sewer installation. So it is something we've been made aware of by our communications and meetings with the towns, and something that we're focused on and looking into further.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Moving down, the next question is from Z Crocker. Some CWMPs currently include areas that, while important, are decades away from impacting sensitive estuaries. Given that climate change may act as a force multiplier within this proposed regulatory structure, how is DEP thinking about the time to travel considerations? Drew?
Yeah, I can start it off. That's my ability. So within the MEPs, it was estimated that, on average, it's different from embayment to embayment, but it's 7 to 10 years of travel time of seeing actual impacts of strategies within the watershed into the bay. And so a question on how does climate change impact this time of travel? I don't know. We're all learning about that at the same time. But the benefit of the strategy for watershed permit is once the relationship is established for routine meetings and having the permit and annual reports, 5th-year reports through the watershed permit process, we can stay on top of it and make the adjustments along the way as needed. Adaptive management, that term has been thrown out multiple times, and it's going to have to be applied because yes, we do have the targets that are established now, but along the way we'll be encouraging to assure that we are moving in the right direction and reassessing those targets And so within the proposed regulations, we have minor and major modifications that could be requested of the permit. And as we have our technical assistance sessions with the towns, DEP can encourage those modifications as needed, so we can make sure that we will see the effects in the bay eventually. So that's the best way I can answer that. So unfortunately, we don't really have a crystal ball on the climate change, but we're all learning on that at the same time. So
Thanks, Drew. Anything to add, Leldon or Mary Beth? Tough question.
Yeah, no, not for me.
Okay. Good question, but tough question. But I think Drew hit it really well. Kate Russa followed up with a citation. Before, I believe Kate before was referring to best available nitrogen reducing technology and wondering how that was similar or different from a technology she was referencing in the watershed permitting regulations under 21.02.
She's referring to the definition. It's used in the definition for conventional control approach. And thank you very much, Kate, for finding that. And so in looking at that definition for conventional control approach or technology, it says examples of conventional control technology include but are not limited to sewage treatment plants and enhanced nutrient removal alternative septic systems that the department accepts as conventional treatment. So yes, they are similar in use. We're referring to nitrogen removal systems. That could also be phosphorus removal systems that have achieved general use. So I hope that answers your question, and thank you for searching for us. Appreciated.
All right, thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you for following up, Kate.
Tim, if I could just follow
Yeah, Drew, go ahead.
again on that, the last response or response before about climate change. We are, to add to it, we are considering the FEMA flood maps and looking at sea level rise when it comes to siting discharge locations. And I'm sure that'll be a recommendation as well when it comes to siting Title V systems anytime we can provide assistance to the Board of Health. So that's one way to kind of give a more concrete answer on one strategy where we are cognizant of potential impacts, and we give those recommendations to consultants on making sure that there's adequate separation between the discharge location, the bottom of it, and estimated high groundwater. So yeah.
Great, thanks for the follow-up, Drew. All right, the next question is from an anonymous attendee. And it says, so a watershed permit will give alternatives to achieving the goals. That said, the watershed permit will allow for reining in other sources of nitrogen that are protected by statute, and DEP must be then working with the legislature to file bills to allow communities to control all sources of controllable nitrogen. If not working to file a bill to assure towns and cities have absolute control, how will the watershed permit be achieved without a focus on septic systems, especially in built-out communities?
So Tim, I have a few thoughts about this
Sure.
question. I mean, there are other authorities that DEP has and that municipalities have that allow us to control sources of nitrogen, for example, coming from stormwater. So MassDEP has regulations around stormwater management. There's the MS4 program, which is a federal program that designates some communities as MS4 communities, and that municipality also has responsibility for managing, the stormwater related, for managing stormwater. So there are some authorities there. I'm not, there are one of the earlier questions mentioned fertilizers and so forth, and Drew spoke to, kind of working collaboratively with places like golf courses or municipalities where there might be nitrogen sources and trying to address those through different techniques, BMPs at some of the golf courses he spoke to, via fertigation, for example. And also just trying to reduce those sources through some mechanisms within the watershed permit. So I think many of those sort of authorities already exist. I would note that, DEP is in the executive branch, and so DEP doesn't file legislation directly with the legislature. That responsibility rests with the chief executive. DEP, of course, works with the governor's office and the other agencies on legislation. We get legislation for comment and so on. So that I think would answer part of that question related to, working on other legislation and so forth. Hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if others have something to contribute on that.
Okay. Thanks, Weldon. The next question is also from an anonymous attendee. When would the requirement to upgrade a residential system to an IA be enforced? At the time of property sale or at the end of the 5-year grace period? How will the upgrade be enforced if not by property sale? Mary Beth?
So I can field this one to start. So there isn't a transfer requirement at time of transfer, except that the owner needs to notify could have the owner notify the buyer that they are in an NSA. The way Title V, the reg revisions are written, it is up to the individual homeowner to determine that they are in the NSA, be it through information in their town, or DEP will be providing maps for these areas as they are designated. So it is not a property transfer. The 5-year time frame, time clock goes unless a town gets a watershed permit. And if the town does not get a watershed permit at the end of that 5 years, it would be initially the Board of Health who would need to be enforcing this requirement, and then they could be assisted by DEP if needed with that enforcement for the installation of the system. Drew or Weldon, I don't know if you'd like to add.
Drew or Weldon, anything to add?
No.
No,
Okay.
no, not for me, no.
Okay. Next question from Anonymous. As an operator of current nitrogen removal technologies, I can state based on experience that in several of the Cape and Island communities where properties are used on an intermittent basis that these levels cannot be met all the time. Homeowners or renters can turn off the blowers or aerators when they are noisy and are creating odor. It takes time for systems to ramp up to the balance needed in the tanks to denitrify. Several options would be better than just one best available. Just an experienced opinion. Mary Beth or Drew?
I appreciate you sharing your experienced opinion, and we agree. All of those things happen. And I think as we spoke to earlier, with the need, there will be more technologies. There will be more technologies achieving lower performance values. There will be technologies that can be adapted and maintain performance even in the seasonal situation. There is need for these technologies, and I think as we go along, you will see those technologies happen and perform better. Yes, the operation of the facility, of the technology, can be problematic if the homeowners are turning off necessary parts. That's one of the reasons, one of many reasons why we require an operator to oversee. And again, if these systems are utilized in terms of a watershed permit, then a town can actually opt to operate those systems. That's an option for the town. So those are the things we've considered in examining those issues that you've raised. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, the next question is from Jeff Sellens. Are you giving the homeowners choices of systems, giving them the rough installation cost, efficiency, cost to run, energy, question mark? Mary Beth?
So yes, the choices of the system, the systems that are approved, their approvals are posted on DEP's website. The information on cost, you would be getting that from the system, the technology company. DEP can provide ranges of what those are and can certainly provide information. The energy is a good one for us to consider, obviously asking for that from the technologies. So all very good points, but yes, the choices are, they're all listed on our webpage. Their approvals are accessible on our webpage. Their O&M manuals are, all that information is out there in order for the homeowner to make the choice.
Yeah, and I would just add that, the concept of best available control technology is not a new one in, wastewater or say air quality. For example, the ability to achieve certain concentrations of pollutants is, driven by technology, and by having a best available control technology standard, it creates a downward pressure on pollutant loads overall. And it typically, kind of inspires people to continue to develop additional technologies. And so that's certainly what we would hope would happen here, is that as new technologies become available, there'd be more options, but it would continue to create that downward pressure on the concentrations and therefore on the pollutant loads.
The next question is from Anonymous, and the question is this, I'll paraphrase it. We've heard several times about the feasibility complications with the IA upgrade requirement. Requiring compliance in 5 years does not seem feasible / likely for any community. It seems as though the Title V revisions are only intended to, quote, require a watershed permit. Why isn't the watershed permit just made the requirement? Leldon, do you want to take a stab at that one?
I think that this question, and I know Mary Beth maybe has a longer history of this particular topic than I do, but I think that this question has to do with statutory authority. And, by creating this voluntary program, people can enter into it voluntarily. So I think that there are some limits on DEP's statutory authorities, and that's why we didn't make it a requirement. That's kind of my take on that. Anybody else?
Yeah, you want to add to that, Mary Beth?
Yeah, so just more specifically, our authority is in Title V and the regulation of septic systems under Title V. In a home rule state, DEP does not have authority to require municipalities to come in and obtain these permits. It would take a legislative act of creating water pollution abatement control districts in order for DEP to have that authority. So we have put this forward because under Title V, we can regulate septic systems. We know septic systems are contributing to the nitrogen load. Utilizing the individual system upgrades may work for some communities, but it may not work for all communities. And that's why the watershed permit is also being put forth as a voluntary permit that a community can utilize to get to the water quality goals that it needs to achieve. Some, as I said, may be able to do that through the individual system. Others may not be able to achieve that water quality goal through the individual system upgrade.
Right. And I think I would just add one other thing, which is even without specific statutory authority on watershed permits, that the department has broad authority to control water pollution through the Massachusetts Clean Waters Act. And so we have the ability to, to create these kinds of programs in order to try to control water pollution.
Thanks, Logan. I see we are rapidly approaching the end of the session. I don't know what's going to happen at that point if the webinar automatically stops. We'll try to get to all the questions. And I'm going to take these a little bit out of order because there's several coming from possibly the same source. So I'm going to move down to someone we haven't heard from yet. Well, David Gray says Nantucket IA systems average 80,000 to 120,000, but there's no question. Do you know what he's referring to there, Mary Beth?
Assuming that's cost, but I'm not positive. Drew, can you speak to the specifics of Nantucket?
No, I'm assuming the same as well. That comment is just really referring to how on the islands things are much more expensive.
Pricier.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, moving down to Cliff Carroll. Under your draft regulations, is the sale of a property going to trigger accelerated compliance? Mary Beth?
No. The sale of the property does not trigger the need to install. You have the time frame to install. So if there's a property transfer within that 5-year time frame, the buyer will be made aware of it, and then it would be the responsibility of the buyer to upgrade that system and add the nitrogen removal system within whatever is left of that 5-year time period.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth.
Right. I would just add, Tim, I would just refine that response a little bit. Unless the buyer and seller agreed to some, arrangement that led to the upgrade prior to the sale of the property.
Okay, thanks, Logan. Okay, moving down to a question from Stephanie, I think it's Sequin. Would composting toilets be considered an option to an IA? And I think she means alternative option to an IA system. Mary Beth?
Oh, it's a good question. I would like to think on that question, Stephanie, and get back to you.
Okay. Let's see. Cliff Carroll has a question. Based on the questions and the lack of solid answers from the panel, it seems that we are putting an incredible burden on Cape Cod community. $35,000 per homeowner at a time when the technology does not even exist. This is a case of the law before the technology is available. Great idea, but this is a very expensive cart before the horse, and an experimental one at best. Mary Beth?
Well, I think we have been noting, we are aware of the expense. And I think we have a very real problem that we presented the information on. Our embayments are in serious trouble, and we need to start taking action to address that. I think we've all also spoken to the fact that although technologies may be coming along to address this for the IA piece of it, this can help drive those technologies to come along and better their performance. Similar to when, the drinking water protections were put in place, the technologies came in and demonstrated their performance. I think we're likely to see the same. So yes, we have some available and we're looking to have more available, but this isn't going to be, not everyone's going at once, and we're hoping over time there will be more availability. And Drew and Leldon, I don't know if you care to add any other comments.
As usual, Mary Beth, you really are knowledgeable and get to the heart of this, but I think anybody that reads these MEP reports, we talked about the water quality problem in kind of a general way in order to present it over the whole geographic area that this reg is designed to cover, these regs are designed to cover. But if you read these MEP reports, look at the TMDLs, review the data and the background on those, you can't help but conclude that there's a serious water quality problem. And MassDEP is making this effort to try and address that water quality problem and begin those reductions. And while there are, limitations on the ability to fully implement it, it's a move in the right direction, and we think that it will help to compel some of the other things to come along. The improvements in additional technologies, perhaps additional operators, and all those things will hopefully follow. So this is our proposal.
Well, the next question is from Anonymous. It says Title V was really to ensure a working sanitary septic system for the homeowner and thus the point of sale inspection. Nitrogen reduction seems to have no immediate benefit to individual homeowners, but to the community at large. However, you are asking individual homeowners to be responsible, even if there is some subsidy. Why not make the towns responsible for upgrades if they fail to get a watershed permit? I think the question is going to why not ask the towns to get a permit first? And that was answered previously. And the answer was because presently DEP does not have statutory legal authority to require towns to enter a watershed permit. And so our regulatory authority lies with Title V in the first instance, and then towns can seek a watershed permit if that is the path that they choose for that community. Anybody else want to add anything to that? No. Okay.
I think that the Title V upgrade requirement is getting at the source of the problem, and that it does benefit the individual as well as the community at large to try to reduce or eliminate those sources of nitrogen, because those waterways are, commons. They're held in commons. They're part of the whole community's waterways that contribute to other things like fishing and shellfishing and recreation and property values and other things that we spoke to at the beginning in the presentation.
And we have two comments left. They're not questions, they're comments. I'll read them. It's from Anonymous. They're both from Anonymous. One says, would like to thank the panel for your time and thoroughness. You have all put a significant amount of work to improving water quality. Thank you. And the next one is, we've known for decades that wastewater, specifically traditional Title V systems, is the source of water quality issues on the Cape. I want to applaud DEP for their efforts to address these issues in a flexible way. And that was the last question. And I want to thank everybody for submitting your questions. Very helpful, thoughtful, probing questions. And we're out of time now for the virtual raise your hand function. What I would suggest is that if you still have questions and you want to do that by raising your hand, I would suggest going to the information session tomorrow at noon, from noon to 2. Or also we have the 3 public comment periods as well, where you can participate either remotely or in person at 2 of the sessions and comment as well. So apologize. Mary Beth has something to say.
Just another suggestion, if we did not get to a question, you can certainly email us. If you have a town-specific question, my suggestion would be to email Drew Osei or Gerard Martin, and it's our names with the period in between at mass.gov. And if you have a question we didn't get to pertaining to IA technologies or specifics of the regulatory revisions and the new regs, you can send those to my attention, marybeth.chubb@mass.gov.
Okay, great.
Kim, just a couple of housekeeping things before we go.
Sure,
Just
Lawson.
if one of us can make sure that is there a way to save the Q&A? The recording I know gets uploaded as well,
Yeah,
right?
I spoke with Tori about that previously, and I think we've got that taken care of.
Great, thanks.
Anything else from any of the panelists?
Well, I have a question actually for Mary Beth, to put her on the spot. So Mary Beth, you mentioned about people sending emails to us individually and whatnot, but if they want the comments to be part of the formal public comment period, they have to also do that. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is available on that public hearing website that I showed in the presentation. I just meant if we did not get to your question that you had tonight and you wanted to email one of us, you are welcome to do that if we did
Right.
not
I also
answer your
wanted
question. Correct.
to reiterate that even if they ask us the question, if they wanted to be part of the comment period, they need to do that officially as well.
Right.
Yeah, and you can do that through dep.talks, TALKS @mass.gov. And that link is out on that public hearing webpage, in the public hearing information.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mary Beth. Yeah, as I pointed out at the outset, this is an information session. It's not a public comment period.
Right.
And it's the purpose is to provide more information to the community, as distinguished from the 3 public comment periods that we'll be having and the written comment period, which is open now. So make sure if you have comments that you want to be considered as part of these regulations and consideration before they become final, to submit those public comments either in writing or at the public hearings that are coming up. And so with that, if there's nothing else from Drew, go ahead. Yeah.
So someone earlier asked a question about budgeting and resources on MassDEP end. Not sure if I'm allowed to do this, so I'll ask forgiveness later if I get in trouble, but we will have openings. So please keep your eye out on Mass Careers. We actually have an opening now for hydrogeologist. We are, looking to increase the numbers in our program. So we need those applications to come in as well to support this effort.
I have no problem with that, Drew.
Yeah, I don't either.
Good
Drew.
plug.
Yeah, good plug, Drew. Thank you. Thank you.
All the exciting work. And yes, there was a question which Tim had spoken to, but just to reiterate, this recording will be posted on the website for this information session.